This is the Jim Nog Pod with your host, Jim Noguera. On today's show, Whitish, Marcos de Jesus, and Jaroslav Grytsayo. Let's start the show.
This is the Jim Nog Pod with Jim Noguera. It is the Jim Nog Pod with Jim Noguera.
Most interested man
It is the
in the
Jim Nog
world.
Pod with Jim Noguera.
A most interested man
With Jim
in the world. Interested,
It is the Jim
interested.
in the world.
Welcome to the pod. During the outro music of the last podcast, I stated that the guest for the next podcast, this one, would be Seco 1844 and a special musical guest. Because of scheduling, that fell through. That didn't happen. And we have rescheduled. Today's podcast was supposed to contain a conversation between 4 individuals. One individual, however, did not feel comfortable with his participation in the conversation. And so that put me in a rather difficult situation, and I had to edit the podcast in such a way that his voice was taken out. And that's also why I can't use the video that I recorded. There might be some continuity errors or some references to something that was said by the individual who was taken out of the podcast. So bear with that. I tried to do the best with the editing that I could do. We talked about a set of very controversial topics: race and identity politics. There are many comments made, and we all have different political leanings or just different ways of looking at the world. So if someone says something on the podcast and it isn't refuted by someone else on the podcast, it doesn't necessarily mean that that person speaks for everyone. Each person on the podcast speaks for him or herself. Some of the other participants in the conversation wished we had spent more time talking about white privilege and deconstructing white identity. I seem to have been focused on the issue of identity politics, and that's where I guided the conversation. Marcos wanted me to read the following statement. Marcos referred to the remarkable freedom story of Joshua Glover. He used the wrong last name. He is sorry for not remembering correctly. Overall, it was a great conversation, and I hope that we get to do it again. And now, Whitish, featuring yours truly, Marcos de Jesus, and Jaroslav Grytsayo. Here we are, 4 whitish cats gathered together in some sort of patriarchal conspiracy. Maybe we just go around, introduce ourselves a little bit. I'm James. I'm Jim. I'm the host.
I'm Jaroslav. I am not the host.
I am Marcos. I am so not the host that I don't even have my own microphone.
So this is your third time on.
Third time.
It is my third time. I am the founding member of the exclusive 3-timer club of the Jim Noguera Pod. Very proud of that.
Everybody has been on the show before, and I think that's a really cool thing because people are starting to get to know you guys a little bit, I feel like, on the show. So what we're going to talk about today is race, identity politics, and before we get started, Brother Marcos, you wanted to read us some rules of combat, I think.
Well, I thought so. There are a couple of things I wanted to share, and first of all, just say thank you and thanks to my brothers for being here today. And I think this is an important and meaningful public conversation to have. And so I think I'll start with could I start with the Ruby Sales quote? All right. So I think each of us in our life experiences have had these spaces where we're kind of forced to think about identity in ways that really expand or push beyond the way that race has traditionally been constructed and categorized in the United States. And I think it is important for everybody. My sense that it's important for everybody to have a positive sense of their identity that's not based on not based on what you're not, but some pride and some joy in what you are. Was really formed by my upbringing, which was a part of urban churches that had been very influenced by the African American-led civil rights movement. So Dr. King's expression that everybody needs a sense of somebodyhood was very influential to me. And recently, I heard a quote from Ruby Sales, who's a civil rights leader who's a little younger than Dr. King. She was born in 1948 and was was involved with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She made a statement recently that really encouraged white folks to think about identity, to think about our own identities. And this is what I heard her say on the program On Being. Quote, "There's a spiritual crisis in white America. We talk a lot about black," and she's a theologian, so she's going to be talking about it in these terms. But we talk a lot about black theologies. But I want a liberating white theology. I want a theology that speaks to Appalachia. I want a theology that begins to deepen people's understanding about their capacity to live fully human lives and to touch the goodness inside of them rather than call upon the part of themselves that's not relational. Because there's nothing wrong with being European American. That's not the problem. It's how you actualize that history, how you actualize that reality. It's almost as if white people don't believe that other white people are worthy of being redeemed. I don't quite understand that. It must be more sexy to deal with black folk than to deal with other white folk if you're a white person. As a black person, I want a theology that gives hope and meaning to people who are struggling to have hope and meaning in a world where they are no longer essential to whiteness, no longer as essential to whiteness as they once were. So, for the sake of creating credible signs of hope, let's talk about that's the end of her quote. Now I'm suggesting, so for the sake of creating credible signs of hope, let's talk about our complex experiences of identity. I'll just read this whole thing, because I think I've come to believe that everybody needs to be somebody, a positive idea of your identity. and that having that positive idea or identity that's not based on negating somebody else's humanity can lay groundwork for celebrating diversity and for being an ally, for working for justice. I think that real talk about the diversity of European American experiences can help deconstruct the myths and lies of monolithic white supremacy. And lastly, that whiteness in the USA has often been defined as all or nothing. So this whole concept of whitishness that I think, James, you're the first person I ever heard use that term. But that whole concept challenges that notion of kind of all or nothing categories. So these subjects can be sensitive. Here are a few guidelines for respectful conversation that I adapted from my father's work as an anti-racism dialogue facilitator. He mainly worked with a church group called the Lutheran Human Relations Association. Hi, Papi. My father, Miguel de Jesus. So this is the their guidelines I'm going to try to follow, and maybe they'll be helpful for all of us. I'll speak only for myself. If I need to communicate information beyond my life experience, I'll tell the story of how I came to a certain understanding. 2, I will listen with empathy. 3, I'll avoid speaking a third time until everyone has had a chance to speak once. 4, I'll have fun. We're among friends. And 5, I'll defer to Jim Noguera. It's his show.
And those are really great rules. I would add, let's try not to talk over each other. So I think, why don't we start by, those are really great rules and a lot of great ideas. And I do want to go back to sort of the messages of, or what identity politics stood for during the 1960s, 1970s, and then how it's changed to today. But before we get to that, let's talk about our experiences, and maybe we can go all the way around and just what do you think about sort of? We coined this phrase "whitish," which we think is funny. Because
maybe someone else will think it's funny too.
I hope so. Because I don't identify as white. I have a lot of Spanish ancestry, but I also have native indigenous ancestry as well. And it's interesting because I've gotten called white boy growing up in the Bronx a lot. What else? In high school, it's really funny. In high school, which my high school was predominantly black, a popular refrain that I would often hear is this is majority black, majority Latino high school. They would say, "I hate white people, son," and that's you would hear that all the time. And I don't think that they were necessarily racist in the sense that of the KKK. It's just because they didn't know white people. It was hard for them to be racist if they didn't really have hardly any experiences with white people besides maybe a few teachers. But anyway, you know what they would say, because I would be right there, and they would say, "Yeah, but James ain't white though." So it was sometimes convenient for me to be labeled white, and then convenient at other times not to be labeled as white. So those are some of my experiences growing up. It was difficult being, I guess, light-skinned growing up in the Bronx, because you are different, and I think it's just easy to spot difference, and it's just easy to, I guess, to pick on it, and that's something that's really human. And so I don't feel bitter about being called white boy. Or was I picked on for being light-skinned? Maybe a little bit in high school, but I had a lot of black friends, which always helps if you're going to go to a predominantly black high school. I'm lucky that my other friend wasn't some frail light-skinned kid like myself. That would not have helped. But maybe Jaroslav can be next. What has been some of your experiences? Maybe talk about your quote whiteness and what you think.
I wasn't born here. I'm sure you guys know. I was born in Ukraine. My family came here when I was 4.5, 5. And race isn't really something I thought about at 5 years old. It's not something my parents talked about. Outside of my parents are both very religious, so it's all, respect everybody, respect their beliefs. Everybody's a person. That's kind of where it ended. And then as you get older, you start to realize that race is a thing, and it's a thing that everybody kind of has to deal with in their own way. Would I self-identify as white? I mean, I guess I have to, right? There's no, other box for me.
I would, if I may,
Sure.
I'd offer a foundational value as my favorite Kwanzaa principle, kujichagulia, self-determination. There's a question of how others will identify you, but you said, I guess I have to. I think everyone should have the right to self-determination. Identify yourself how you want to.
I just meant I'm obviously not black, right? I don't look like I have any Asian heritage or anything like that, right? If you ask me to identify hey, what are you? I'd be like, I'm Ukrainian. A Rangers fan. There's a lot of things I would list before I was like, oh, and I'm white. But yeah, that is that. But in our society, that is the box I fall into, right? Because we like boxes. We like checking them off. We like putting people in them. It makes things easier. And yeah, so I guess I'm white, but that I don't think that means to me what it means to other people. Because like I said, I'm from Ukraine. We're in America, there seems to be this notion that if you're white, you're either a WASP or Irish Catholic, right? I don't align with either of those, right? There's a lot more to it than that. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for sharing. Marcos, if you can just talk about growing up and how you self-identified.
So thank you for that question. This is really, you could say loaded or really rich question for me. And if you'd like more of my thoughts on it, well, actually, James is really familiar with my thoughts on it because he's listened to my first album, Code Switching, a lot. And
You're mixed it.
I'm Mixed It. That's the opening track from the album. But I don't think I want to do that whole track. But you can just Google that and it's on YouTube if you want to find it. And maybe you need to know how to spell Mixted. Mixted.
Plot twist.
Yeah. Actually, I'll just do the beginning of that. When I was a kid, sometimes the streets would melt with pavement and tar flowing like tar down dangerously hot inner city summers of our discontent. Innocent, I ran on those molten rivers. My friends explaining as necessary, he ain't white, he's mixed it. For the kids who didn't know who I was. Thank you, brother. It's
I do listen to his CD all the time.
Thank you, bro. It's so nice to have a hype man who can finish the rhymes for you, right? But yeah, no, absolutely. I'll just stop it there to explain the term mixed it, right? So that was something that happened that people were trying to figure out where I fit in, and that was something that actually happened a few times. Yeah, he ain't white, he's mixed it. And then on the contrast of that, I remember I thought right when I thought I'd come to my peak coolness in middle school, because I had like all the latest dance moves down. I was like ready for one of our middle school dances, and I started. There was like a dance circle, and like I got in the middle of the circle, and I did my moves, and everybody was cheering me on. But you know what they chanted?
White boy.
Go white boy, go white boy. Go. And I was like, and then like I finished my move, but like when I was done, I was like, some of you guys know my name. So those
people could have started a Marcos chant, right?
Yeah, I thought some. I wasn't that popular, apparently, but I thought some of them knew my name. Now, Alexander Hamilton said it's in times of war that men may rise. I thought in middle school it was at the school dances that you might get more popular, you know. But so I had those two poles that I kind of moved between as a kid because in terms of my public life, because I grew up in Central City, Milwaukee mainly, and the schools I was going to, although my family has some Bronx roots and I was born here, but the schools I was going to were about 80% African American, and basically the concept of identity was very binary. You could be black or white. It was black or white, literally, right? Within my home, our concept, we had our own like kind of intimate, beloved community and concept of identity, and we knew exactly who we were. We were Germarican. So me and my sister came up with that term because those were two meaningful sides of our identity that we lived. That my father's side is Puerto Rican, Nuyorican from the Bronx, for a couple of generations. That we had Spanish in the home. We had drums and cultural expressions that we really lived and experienced. And we also and we loved our abuelita, and we loved our oma and opa. We didn't ever call anybody grandma or grandpa. You know, it was abuela. We didn't know abuelo growing up, but we knew oma and opa, and we loved them all. And I never called myself Puerto Rican and white, partly because I just couldn't figure out what white meant. It seemed like a page with nothing drawn into it yet. But I had a positive sense of what German meant, and Oma and Opa were that, and some of the old songs we sang at church were that, and that was beautiful. I could connect to that. And then also Puerto Rican identity is not a racial identity, right? It's a cultural identity. So as I matured, I came to think of myself as not like half anything. I'm two things. And that's makes some folk, or sometimes that's uncomfortable, sometimes that's not acceptable for some constructions of identity. But I'm two things, and I've come to feel that it's meaningful, that I can't to think of myself that way, because I can't cut myself up into halves. I can only be one person at a time, and come to the conviction that you don't have to be less for being more. And also, one other thing that I picked up from my experience with my father's anti-racism work was this term European American, that Ruby Sales used in that quote that I read. It sounded so weird to me when I first heard it, but more and more I'm thinking that it's good to have that as an option, especially because whiteness historically in this country has been about what you're not. Rather, it's a kind of a negation rather than this positive category for identity. And European American could just be, this overall heading that could have a lot of space for diversity within it.
Yeah, I think the phrase whitish, it works well. I like to say Latino because it's just the least racially, but it's not like a racial distinction necessarily. It's just cultural. And I like that idea. I think ideas of race and individual identity or group identity is gonna go away because of necessity. We're moving into a time that will, just to put it plainly, I mean, people are going to mix more, and race is going to become even more and more ambiguous, or just not. You won't be able to necessarily say with any sense of accuracy what specifically you are, unless you take a long time to sort of explain it all. And I think that's a great thing, because if you do your DNA testing, you with one of these services like 23andMe, and you find out that you have ancestry literally all over the world, I think that's a very powerful way to connect you to the world, to issues all around the globe, whether it's happening in China, in India, in Latin America, in Europe, in Africa. If you have ancestry throughout, you just feel more connected to everything, and I think that will have a positive impact on all of this identity politics stuff that's happening right now, which is where I wanted to sort of shift the conversation to. I want to talk a little bit about identity politics in America, and in my humble estimation, I think it's a big factor in explaining why Trump won the presidency. The rise of white identity politics. So, I mean, I'll just throw that issue out there. I mean, we don't have to go clockwise like before, but, I mean, what's your assessment of this problem? Like, how bad is it? Why? What do you guys think?
So, yeah, we live in New York City. New York City is not a good representation of America as a whole. We're much more progressive than the rest of it. We're much more progressive than the rest of the state, really. Like you go an hour upstate and it's all Trump country, right? And so it's hard. Way too often I will have an opinion or like a feeling about something, and then I'll say that's probably wrong though. Like my perception is skewed because I live here. Race relations are probably not as good as, in the Midwest as they are on the 4 train, for example. And they're not always great on the 4 train either. And yeah, it's one of those things that like, it gets really hard to talk about because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. I don't want to offend anybody. And I am ignorant of a lot of things, right? But that doesn't, I'm still a person though. I still view things, I internalize them, I have opinions. And yeah, it's just, a lot of times race comes up and I just try to back away from the conversation because, all the things I just stated, not wanting to hurt anybody. But also, it feels like I don't really have a horse in the race. You know what I mean? Right, whitish.
In the race.
Yeah. Didn't catch that. Yeah, it feels like I don't, like when people start talking shit about white people, right? There's this like knee-jerk, like sort of like, I know you're talking about me, but you're not really talking about me. You don't know that you're not talking about me. But and it just kind of gets very, of course, the people I'm close with, we talk about it. I'll joke about it. Me and, you guys know my girlfriend, Maria, who's Dominican. We were on the couch, watching the news when all this, Where was it? The protest? The guy. Charlottesville. There we go. Where the guy ran over the people. Right. And so we're like watching the news on her couch, just like horrified at what we're seeing. And a commercial comes on, and she kind of like shifts, and she ends up smacking me in the face with the back of her hand. And I look at her, and I'm like, race war? Race war? Yeah, to kind of, it's lighten the mood. It's all right to talk about. It's all right to joke about. Except sometimes it's not.
Jaroslav, could I ask if there's anything like I think sometimes our conversations where I learn a little more about your kind of just how you have experienced identity coming from the history of Ukraine kind of just enriches my sense of European American experiences. Is there anything you want to say about that, or are we scared of Putin?
Nah, I've my Xbox Live handle is Puck Putin, which is fuck Putin with the first letters. But yeah, so being Ukrainian, yeah, you don't like it in America, in the Western world in general, or maybe the entire world. As I think about, being white, the white identity that's associated with like imperialism, right? You got the British Empire, whatever, the Dutch, some call America a modern day empire, right? Invasion, just cultural appropriation, the taking of land, the raping of women. I'm from Ukraine. That shit was happening to us for centuries. So that's like that I don't like. Yeah, you don't put that on me. We were fighting our own battles when all that happened. Not that like isn't a valid argument. What America does now, has done in whatever Latin America, the Middle East, but that's not Ukraine. That's not me. That's not my parents. It's not my grandparents. It's nobody. It's nobody who I could point to in my family. Like, yeah, you did that. And so yeah, that is part of why, like, it's hard to just like stand up and say, yeah, I'm white, because I'm not in that sense.
Well, yeah, and so that hearing you say that may make many people uncomfortable, and I think the dialogue is I want to welcome dialogue and people having different perspectives, right? But I would definitely affirm your right to just everyone's right to self-determination, and especially considering the way that whiteness historically hasn't been. It's not like this historical cultural identity. It's a way. It's this mask put over a diversity of real historical cultural identities, and I think it'd be fine if all of us were done with whiteness, and then we can talk about a diversity of European American experiences, and that's not to say, and then I think still also be anti-racist, which I think in your way I see you living that. And has your relationship been has that gotten you in trouble with family or
my relationship
anybody?
With Maria?
Yeah.
No. My family loves Maria.
She's hard not to love.
Yeah, exactly. And we celebrate Christmas a little later than most Americans, January 7th. And so me and my parents, my sister and her boyfriend, who also happens to be Dominican, we joke about it. You move to the Bronx and you get a Yankees fitted and a Dominican significant other. It's part of the welcoming package.
Bro, that's the best case scenario. I'm really glad that's worked out for you, man.
It's not a bad deal.
It's a great deal.
But yeah, so my dad rented a car so that both Maria and my sister's boyfriend could come to Philly and meet my grandma, who's visiting from Ukraine and all that stuff. And yeah, they loved her. There's occasionally you get some funny looks. in both directions, meaning like white people who disapprove, and then people of color who disapprove of the relationship. In her building, she lives in Wash Heights, and so many times in her building, it'll be like she'll walk into the elevator before me, and there's a gentleman there, Latino, black, whatever. And they're, oh, hi, nice to have a good evening, whatever. And then he sees me and then realizes we're together, and it just, have a good night. It just immediately sours on her. He was already sour on me, but he immediately sours on her, like, that's it, we don't need to be friends anymore.
I don't know if that has to do with race. I mean, he's probably just disappointed.
Well, so me and her have this argument all the time, where it's like, is it because you're with a white dude, or is it because you're with a dude? And so, like, you're off the table, because men are,
Hopeful.
President.
That's a optimistic construction.
Hopeful is
infinitely hopeful.
That is a very, very kind way of phrasing what I was gonna say. We're dogs. Present company excluded, hopefully,
Yeah.
but yeah, we're dogs. And so I don't know. I always like to. She was telling me that in her experience, the people who have the biggest problem with interracial relationships is black women, which I can understand. I've seen all those like eHarmony studies where it's
I've seen as well.
in terms of like dating somebody not of your own race, Asian men are the least likely to receive attention from somebody outside of their race, and black women are the least likely in terms of the genders, right? And so in her experience, she's seen a lot of black women who are like, just stealing our men, so on and so forth, right? And yeah, every time that happens in the elevator, we'll walk out and she'll be like, "Did you see that?" And I'll be like, "Maybe that was a black woman, maybe." You don't know.
Self-determination.
Exactly. We don't know. We don't know what that person's living through.
Okay, so maybe we can get back at the issue at hand. So what disturbing to me, right? I try not to follow politics too closely because it will drive you crazy. But it's the poisonous atmosphere of identity politics that has abandoned its original purpose, right? Which is to unify and to not segregate based on race. But it was an answer to, and I think you, Marcos, know the history better than I do. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but they were people of color, African Americans primarily. This is where this movement comes from. Were oppressed. I mean, in the '60s, we have a legitimate case of oppression, and from that, they wanted quite literally a seat at the table, to be equal. And I think now it's more of a way to privilege race. It emphasizes race in a way that we should be moving beyond. We should be moving past. So what do you think about that?
Can it rhyme?
A little bit, yeah.
Are we post-racial because the president was black? Or is
post-racial
post-racial a strategy, attack, gains of generation struggling as one? No need to lift your voice and sing. All right, I guess we won. Post-racial, a brand new day. Post-racial, look at the NFL and the NBA. But are the players really players or well-paid wage slaves? In Ghana, is W.B. Du Bois kicking in his grave? The hook has indelicate diction. I am concerned. Art is always partly fiction. But if you heard or saw a white artist's inappropriate use of, say, the word slave, I hope you weren't offended. but does it also show how we're not past these issues even today?
So I think we can. I think we can both agree, on our slightly different perspectives.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying.
In that, there's still bias. I think innate bias in everyone, because I think that's kind of just it's like a brain shortcut. It's just an easier way to navigate life, and so we
like putting people in boxes.
We like boxes.
Yeah.
It's just it makes things easier. We can't know everything or know everyone or whatever. And yeah, there's a lot of harmful stereotypes and boxes. But at the same time, I mean, we could take it too far. And like some Black Lives Matter activists who, there was a recent story about, what was the story about? Well, I mean, the general idea is that sometimes these activists have a legitimate cause. The overwhelming killing of black people who are unarmed, compared to, a white person who is unarmed, right? You're something like 4 times more likely to be shot and killed unarmed if you are black as opposed to white. And I understand that there are many people who debate these data points, and the majority of people killed are white. Yes, we live in a majority white country. I think that that's part of it. I don't know all of the data that well, right? I'm not going to sit here and say I understand all of it. But you see what I'm saying, right? There's a legitimate concern sometimes, but because of the toxic ideology of identity politics, that because your ancestors were oppressed, or because you belong to a minority, that you should be given stuff for free, or that you are being oppressed today because something doesn't go your way. I think that's part of the problem. And I think that white identity politics is, recently, the upsurge has been a response to the identity politics of the left, and I think we see the pendulum swinging back. I don't know.
Okay, can I just to respond to that? I think that's part of the story, of Trumpism, but I think there is a deeper story beneath the surface that could be more effectively challenged by trying to do the things that Ruby Sales was calling on people of our country, and especially white folks, to do that work, and also because the huge, maybe the biggest problem with the traditional construction of identity politics is that it's created this notion that only certain people have an identity, where the reality is, of course, we all have complex elements that form our identity, and if everybody has this sense of somebodyhood, and if you don't see it as this zero-sum game where there's scarcity and there's not enough for everybody, where I think there's actually abundance and there is enough, more than enough for everybody, to in God's creation, right? That's my faith conviction, and I think the math supports it in the United States and in the world today, that there is abundance, there is more than enough for everybody. Then identity politics wouldn't be like this side thing that distracts from what's really going on, but it can be integrated into just a real a real gains of generation struggling as one, right? And Ruby Sales had a transformative experience of that. I highly recommend Googling her Library of Congress interview, where she talks about this experience where, I don't remember the details, but when she was a young Southern Freedom Movement activist in the South, a white Episcopal seminarian leapt in front of a bullet that was from a racist shooter that was aimed at her, and so like her, and she didn't speak for that, or she had trouble speaking for months after that experience. Dr. King said, "We may have come here on different ships, but now we're all in the same boat." You know, certainly a lot of the African American led freedom movement, the civil rights movement, was interested in getting to a place where, you know, as Dr. King said, you're not judged by the color of your skin, but the content of your character. The question is, how do we get there? You know, and I think Ruby Sales has some insights about how to do that. If we can all positively talk about our identities, then we can also be open for some of Bernie's insights, that the reality, or the Occupy movement's insights, that the reality is that there's a real huge supermajority, a 99%, that shares some common needs and values and interests. And we could get past the kinds of identity politics, whether they're white identity politics or any other identity politics, that sometimes can end up being a distraction.
Absolutely. I think we should get beyond race. You know, I think that's clearly what we have to do. I think you brought up a lot of great points. I'm not sure what to respond to. I think you're right that there are some legitimate issues that, you know, the black community has. For example, that the power structures, as you put it, are not, you know, they're not in it to really understand the frustration. You know, a lot of the BLM frustration, you know, by white America, I don't feel like they really understand it because they don't live in it. You know, and that was a really good connection to MLK's letter from Birmingham jail, because the point is that when you're facing oppression, and I think at their time, at Martin Luther King's time, it was a more real oppression. I think there is some oppression that exists today. What the DOJ found out about what the police were doing in Ferguson, Missouri, to the local community. I mean, I think that was a systematic oppression, and you know, whether it was based primarily on race or on class, I don't know, but so oppression exists. To respond really quickly to your disagreement with me in terms of moving beyond race, I guess what I mean by moving beyond race is not sort of making it the focus. Like, I see what you mean, that a person who if you have a friend who's black and you want to sort of recognize his blackness, yes, that can be important part of the person's identity. I think it's just, you know, I think there's a difference between recognizing a part of your identity and using it to lead the discourse today, and privileging a group because there has been oppression. I think that in its nature is is divisive. I mean, maybe I'm idealistic here, but yeah, I think we should move away from race. I think we should connect to like our human race. I think it's a more valid concept, and I hope that the idea of race goes away. I think it's divisive. I don't know how else to say it, but in short, that's just what I think. Brother Marcos.
Hey, thank you. So, yeah, I think you guys both. Do you have a chance? Of it? But so I think you guys both, and I think we've aired some different sides of that well. So, unless you have something you wanted to add on that point, I wanted to move. I was thinking of something different.
Sure. Excuse me. I don't know a lot of these terms. Passing familiarity with identity politics, things like that. I'm pretty sure I know what you're talking about, but also there's that uncertainty. Talking about identity, I identify as a liberal. Sometimes I think liberals do take things too far. You brought up Aziz Ansari. I've read all these think pieces. I read the Babe article, and it's like, what? This is what we're talking about now. We're spending mental energy and ink and bandwidth to talk about this right now, and there are other, not to take away. I'm sure that girl wouldn't want to relive that experience. All right, so there was this thing a few months ago where a bunch of trolls on 4chan were like, it would be funny if we printed up a bunch of posters that said it's okay to be white and put them up on college campuses. And they put them up on college campuses, and liberals took the bait, and they started argue. Why do you have that poster up? What's your problem with the poster? Are you saying it's not okay to be white? It's just madness, and it doesn't really contribute anything to the conversation. And so the people putting the posters up, they're fucking assholes, but the people responding to them are also fucking assholes. You know what I mean? Like, if I have a t-shirt that says it's okay to be white, why would that be an issue? You know what I mean? Why do you need to approach me and be like, hey, I don't like your t-shirt? That seems to be taking it too far.
Yeah.
And I agree with you about, giving, these sorts of movements the benefit of the doubt, because I have a friend who, this goes on the internet, I'm not going to put his information out there. You know who you are, though. He was a Bernie bro, now a Trump supporter, and I get into these just vicious arguments with him where, like, because he plays dumb, it's, we have affirmative action, black people can go to school for free. So that doesn't mean anything. You can't bar a group of people from, like, education, just owning anything, all the redlining shit, right? And then take that away, and then expect people to all of a sudden have the tools to, like, go get a college education. It doesn't happen overnight. And so I think his argument is disingenuous, and, like, I get that, right? Just because, we're not in Jim Crow anymore doesn't mean that we've progressed as far as we need to progress. But on the flip side, what's your problem with the poster that says it's okay to be white?
Ruby Sales would have no problem, I believe, if her quote is, or maybe not, right? But if her quote was exactly, "There's nothing wrong with being European American," that might be my response, right? If I was on that campus, I would see how long I could, if I could get a bunch of those printed up, and then if there's still an argument with that, then I would be very interested in trying to look at what is this reflexive conflict. Why is this happening? Is it making progress? I'd be very curious about that.
Even in a statement like it's okay to be European American, there seems to be some sort of, why does somebody need to make a statement like that? Who that seems like a response to something, right?
Yes.
What is that a response to?
That was a response to the gospel of Jesus of Nazareth, that the kingdom of God is within you. That was a response to Dr. King saying that you need the fundamental part of your life's blueprint needs to be a sense of somebodyhood, that everybody needs a positive sense of somebodyhood. And I do think it's problematic the way that identity politics has traditionally been constructed with the consent of white liberals as this thing for those minorities to work on. No, everybody has to work on our identity. We all need a positive sense of our identity, and that's gonna lead to that's gonna place you in history somewhere, and you're gonna realize the conflicts, the privileges, and the marginalization that have led us to this moment up in this practice room in what used to be New York University, but was abandoned by New York University and was taken up by Bronx Community College. You know, the layers, it just places you. It just puts you in a real context, and hopefully that kind of just having identity as an aspect of everyone's kind of dialogue and discernment and politics could do the opposite of what kind of this like reflexive, oversimplified identity. I don't know. I hope a messy identity politics could actually help clear up some of our messes.
Or no identity politics.
Okay, so
that's kind of what I meant by moving beyond races. Like, just I think the tribalism is what is poisonous to me.
So, well, two things I wanted to echo that have come up earlier. One of the reasons I love dialogues with my brother James Noguera is the way he often brings in insights from scientific research. And one that I heard recently on the midday program on New York Public Radio, WNYC, that seemed really meaningful to me was this geneticist who just put a number on how close all of us are to Mother Africa, where humanity began, right? Everyone on Earth today descends from an ancestor who left Africa as recently as 80,000 years ago. Like, if you consider that on the scale of the Earth being 4 billion years old, or humanity having something like 1 million years of evolutionary history, wow, we're really closely related, all of us, and all of us connected to Africa in that sense, at the very least. So that was insightful when I heard that recently. I think I forgot the other thing I wanted to mention, but I want to talk a little bit about Germanness, because I think that's just been such a big part of my struggle with identity, and it's so often misunderstood in this country. But the real, when you look at real narratives, because there's diversity, there's tremendous diversity within German historical identities. When you look at the real narratives, the German-American story can really enrich our sense of progressive history in the United States. And so my experience with it was, at first there was Oma and Opa, and I knew Oma and Opa spoke Plattdeutsch, Low German, as opposed to High German, and there was a clear class implication that went along with it, although originally it was just geographic, the lowlands and the highlands, right? And then I learned about the Shoah, World War II, and the Nazis, and I was very concerned around, as pretty early, because there's a lot of news and information in my house growing up. So I became aware of that pretty young, and was very concerned about whether my genes made me connected to that somehow, you know. And what I learned when I looked closer at German American identity is that the big German immigration to the United States happened within the context of political and religious refugees, in particular, and economic refugees or migrants. That the peak of German immigration happened around the revolutions of 1848, the context that inspired the writing of the Communist Manifesto. Was an attempt to set up democratic Republican governments for German-speaking parts of Central Europe, that was ultimately unsuccessful. But so a lot of the people who came in the aftermath brought these tremendously progressive ideas and values along with them. Because of that, there's this remarkable story. Joshua, is it Edelman? I can't remember his last name. Sorry, Bobby. But there's this remarkable story in the city of Milwaukee, if you're downtown, that talks about this mob having raided a jail cell where there was a black man being held. And this is a familiar narrative that I learned about thanks to Dr. James Cameron and the Black Holocaust Museum in the city where I grew up, city of Milwaukee, that tens of thousands of black men and women were lynched in the United States, and often it had to do, part of the story was raiding this jail cell. But why did they raid the jail in the city of Milwaukee? It was after the fugitive slave law had been passed, and they raided the jail to set an escaped slave free. I read that plaque as a young man, and I thought knew what the story was going to be at the end, and I was waiting for it. I was surprised. I was so surprised. It was such a moment of grace for me, realizing, oh, that was a different story. German Americans were a part of a different narrative about European American identity. Not that there wasn't racism, but more than 200,000 German Americans volunteered to fight for the cause of the Union, to preserve Republican rule by the people and for the people in the U.S. Civil War. And there's a park in the Bronx named for one of those heroes. They were volunteering to fight mit Siegel, fight with Siegel, who was a hero of the 1848 revolutions, who became an officer in the Northern Army. And as long as German Americans, so knowing the particulars of each person's story allows you a path to engage race and engage and be an anti-racist ally. Now, for some folk, it'll mean, wow, my ancestors were slave owners, you know? And that's a particular kind of baggage to deal with that I haven't had the personal life experience of wrestling with. But not knowing the particulars and just being in this vague brush of, and for people who are wrestling with that, and for some of the issues we talked about, I highly recommend Ta-Nehisi Coates' article, The Case for Reparations, which is pretty easy to find online. But whatever your story is, I think it's just great. Do some mini version of what Alex Haley did for his family story and roots, and try to figure out, try to get to know your story, and think about what your relationship to it is, and how it informs your hopes for the future. And for me, looking at the particulars of the German American story has been tremendously inspiring. And as long as Germans knew that story, they established kindergarten, founded public universities, and advocated for public school. And they supported these progressive causes and brewed great beer. And as soon as Germans lost that story, and it was not by accident, it was because of persecution during by the kind of WASP, what Anglo-Saxon Protestant power structure in the United States during World War II, during World War I and World War II. And that's very clear because up until World War I, there were more people reading newspapers in German than in English in the city of Milwaukee, and that would also have been true in areas of Brooklyn and the Bronx and Cincinnati and St. Louis. But as long as they knew that family narrative, they were a powerful progressive force in this country. That's behind a lot of the things, a lot of our progressive traditions. When they lost that, German Americans moved to the suburbs, identified as white, often connected with a racist narrative about whiteness, and tolerated bad beer.
That crime is unforgivable.
It's absolutely unforgivable.
Thank you.
Is this our like sign off, more or less?
We'll do that we can start that now. Yeah.
This is a lot of pressure. I don't know if we as a country or a globe will be able to move past race, and what you brought up about being white passing, right? Like even that, hearing that made me uncomfortable for some reason. And I don't know, I just feel like with all of it, the identity politics stuff, the right, the left, just people aren't comfortable talking about it. I'm not comfortable talking about it. I'm not from here. I'm from Ukraine, and when I meet people, I ask where they're from, because I don't assume that anybody was born here. Come to learn that's really offensive to quite a few people, you know? And I understand why, because that question kind of erases the part of your identity that identifies as American, let's say, right? I'm American. Oh, but where are your parents from? That sort of thing, right? I like those conversations because I'm from Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe is big. You know, I meet Romanians, and I'm like, oh, you guys are the only ones in our part of the neighborhood that speak a Latin-based language, and that's, like, cool, you know, we talk about that. And so, yeah, I like to ask that sort of question. A lot of people don't like being asked that sort of question, and they assume that because I look how I look and I'm asking that question, I'm saying something about them. I'm implying something about them, consciously or not. I'm making a judgment on them, and that's not the case. And so as far as moving past race, I don't know, but I would like us as a whole to move somewhere where I can just, you know, ask people questions. I don't...
Go ahead.
Well, thank you, brothers, again. And yeah, it's good to be in this conversation. And a space of that I feel like is a space of beloved community, and many important points have been raised. Probably could do a whole other dialogue on the question of privilege in terms of, and yeah, and let me respond to that just one more, try to respond to it one more way, and then to my sign off, which, oh no, Jaroslav, I was thinking maybe you could start with where you're from, and that might open, you know, then you kind of complicate your identity. You volunteer to complicate.
I mean, generally
your identity.
that does come up. No,
Yeah.
I have yet to meet a person who was like, "Oh, Jaroslav, nice to meet you," and like move on with their day. You know, there's usually a question in there somewhere.
Word, I hear you, bro. For me, like the tremendously stressful thing, like, am I gonna be Marcos? Am I gonna be Marcos?
Oof.
Right, that decision right in the middle of my name. Am I gonna flip the R or not? And
Luckily, your name isn't Jesus.
oh yeah,
That's a bigger.
yeah.
Go ahead.
So about privilege, I do think there is a vocation to try to see how we can actively say no to privilege. It's not gonna be authentic to say I don't identify with white. You have to try to deny, to turn down white privilege, and to also then admit white privilege and try to deconstruct that where possible. And that is a whole other but very important dialogue. And in the Bronx, I also realize for many people, I am an ambassador for whiteness. And this is how segregated our city is, that I am the only white person that know at all. I'm the only white person that many people I interact with. I might be the only white person they know. For other people, I'm the only white person that they think of, that they identify as a white person in their building or in the neighborhood, you know? And so in this context, I'm trying to like be a good one, or you know, and that's another context where we're trying to say no to the privilege and trying to be anti-racist matters here for me living in the Bronx. Many people. I'd like to listen to the closing theme music because I hear that. Do you like that music?
Yeah, we'll
James?
listen. We'll listen
Okay,
to
cool.
it. Yeah,
That's good.
that's fine. Although I guess I can turn up my headphones or just.
That was my effort at a shameless plug.
My outro music by Marco Sanagwagwa.
Oh yeah, thanks.
So I want to thank you all for joining me. This is just an awesome conversation. Maybe there'll be a whitish part 2. And
Maybe we'll find some women who would like to be a part of it, which we acknowledge that's wrong. Sorry, male privilege. # deny it.
But
I know of at least one. We discussed this earlier.
No, it's a female. This is good.
Progress, gentlemen, progress.
All right, peoples. Jim Nog Pod out.
Peace. BX.
I have been scheduling podcasts much more in advance. So next time should be Miguel Gill, another educator, another teacher. He has a degree in philosophy and in psychology. Very smart guy. And we will talk about social justice warriors, feminism, MGTOW, PUA. Should be a lot of fun. Music for Jim Nog Pod by Marco Sanagwagwa. MarcoSanagwagwa.com. Guagua is spelled Guagua. Art by Seco1844 at Seco1844 on Instagram. Seco is SEKO. My website, which contains news and updates, bios, social media links, contact info, a bibliography, a blog, and a podcast page, is jamesnoguera.com. Noguera is Noguera. Please show your support by subscribing and interacting with the pod on iTunes or whatever your favorite podcatcher happens to be, and on YouTube. You can donate on patreon.com/Jimnog or directly via paypal.me/Jimnog. And thank you for your interest.